Sure. Here's the rewritten version of your text while following your instructions closely. Hello, and welcome. Enjoy the content, don't forget to subscribe, and turn on notifications. The hall was pristine, adorned with a blend of sophistication and nostalgia. Photographs of Karen and James were everywhere, showcasing moments from their younger years to recent snapshots, capturing them on vacations, at family events, and during community activities. The tables were elegantly arranged, featuring fine china and crystal glassware that shimmered under the soft light of the overhead fixtures. At the center stood a grand cake decorated with white blooms, symbolizing the 30 years of marriage everyone had gathered to celebrate. The guests mingled with enthusiasm, clinking glasses and sharing words of admiration for the couple. "They're living proof that true love is real," one of Karen's friends commented to a group that hung on her every word. James, donning a warm smile, made an effort to greet everyone, while Karen, ever graceful, moved effortlessly from table to table, ensuring each guest felt at ease. To those present, they embodied the ideal of a strong and joyous partnership. As the clock struck 8, a ripple of anticipation swept through the room. James rose from his seat, adjusting the microphone he held in his hands. The gentle clinking of silverware on glasses brought the room to silence, and all eyes fixed on him. His subtle smile hinted at emotions only he seemed to fully grasp. "Tonight is a night to remember," he began, his voice steady yet laced with a touch of emotion. Glancing at Karen, who sat at the head table, he continued, 30 years ago, we vowed to face whatever life brought our way, together. And here we are, celebrating not just our love, but the resilience that's carried us through." The audience erupted in applause, and Karen smiled, though something in James's expression stirred a faint unease within her. He launched into heartfelt and humorous recollections of their journey, eliciting laughter and admiration from those gathered. Every phrase felt meticulously chosen, yet Karen couldn't shake the sense that there was a hidden layer behind his words, a shadow lurking beneath their warmth. Despite the affection in his tone, the way he observed her, as if studying her every move, left her unsettled. When James concluded his speech, the applause echoed through the hall. He thanked everyone graciously and approached Karen, offering his hand to help her rise. "Shall we dance?" he asked, his voice gentle but with an underlying intensity only she noticed. Karen accepted, allowing him to lead her to the center of the room as a soft melody began to play. They moved seamlessly, as though they'd practiced for this very moment. James held her firmly, their steps in perfect sync, while the music transported the guests to an era where love felt pure and timeless. They danced under admiring gazes, appearing like a couple who had endured life's trials and emerged stronger. Yet as they glided across the floor, James's eyes conveyed a different story. He looked at Karen with a penetrating gaze, his smile masking an unspoken tension. It was as if he sought to uncover something hidden beneath her surface. Karen felt the weight of his stare, and though the room buzzed with applause and whispered admiration, it all seemed muted to her. A tense silence only she could perceive. The dance concluded with an elegant twirl before James pulled her close again. Leaning in just enough for his words to reach her alone, he softly said, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Though the comment sounded harmless, it felt layered with meaning, stirring a sense of unease within her. As they stepped apart, Karen caught a different glint in James's eyes. Not the warmth and joy she had come to expect, but something colder, more calculated. She struggled to maintain her smile, yet an unshakable feeling that something significant loomed ahead hung over her like a shadow. The music continued to play, but to Karen it seemed distant, as if muffled by an invisible tension only she could sense. Returning to the head table, James maintained his smile and waved to the guests, but his hand resting on hers was slightly too firm, almost stiff. As they sat down, Karen noticed the warmth he had shown earlier was replaced by a calm, steady intensity, as though he were waiting for a precise moment to act. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his voice quiet and composed. Its weight enough to make Karen hesitate before nodding slightly, trying to remain composed. James leaned in closer, his words low enough that no one else could overhear. "How long did you think you could keep this from me, Karen?" The impact of his question hit her like a cold wave, her heart pounding as the unease she had felt during their dance returned full force. Blinking rapidly, she fought to stay composed, her mind racing to piece together what he might actually know. What are you talking about, James? She asked, striving to sound calm and confident. Here's the completely rephrased version of your text. Her voice faltered, betraying her despite her efforts. James leaned closer, his face mere inches from hers, the weariness in his expression unmistakable, like someone who hadn't slept in days. His eyes, heavy with exhaustion and simmering anger, locked onto hers. David, he said, enunciating the name with deliberate venom. How long has this been going on? Karen froze as the name echoed in her mind, blending with the hum of music and quiet conversations around them. She knew James wasn't one to confront anyone without evidence. He was meticulous, calculated. If he was speaking now, it meant he had undeniable proof. It's not what you think, she began, her voice trembling. But James cut her off with a bitter, sharp smile. A stark contrast to the warm demeanor the guests had witnessed earlier that evening. Not what I think, he repeated, leaning back in his chair as he crossed his arms, though his voice remained low. Then explain why I saw the messages on your phone. Why you met him so many times. Karen, did you really think I wouldn't notice? That after 30 years I wouldn't know when something was off? Her face flushed, both from his accusation and the realization that she had underestimated him. Karen struggled to find words, anything that might ease the tension, but she knew whatever she said would sound like a hollow excuse. James, I never wanted to hide anything from you, she said finally. David, he lost his wife recently. I was just trying to help him. That's all it was, I swear. James shook his head slowly, as though processing her explanation. Helping him? He asked, his tone laden with disbelief. Is that what you were doing, Karen? Because to me, it looks like something else. It looks like betrayal. The word hit like a heavy blow, weighted with pain. Tears stung Karen's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. She reached out and grasped his arm, trying desperately to ground the moment in some semblance of humanity. James, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not here, not like this. But he gently pulled his arm free, his expression hardening further. You want me to stay quiet? He asked, his voice quiet but cutting. Is that what you've always wanted? For me to remain blind, silent, while you did whatever you pleased? Karen glanced around. Though their conversation remained subdued, she could feel the eyes of those nearby beginning to turn toward them. Her strained smile was crumbling, piece by piece. It wasn't like that, James, she pleaded, her voice a mix of anguish and desperation. It never was. He stared at her for what felt like an eternity before abruptly standing. This isn't over, Karen, he said coldly, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. Karen remained seated, her hands trembling, acutely aware of the curious stares directed at her. She tried to make sense of how an evening meant to celebrate 30 years of marriage had turned into a silent nightmare. The room buzzed with chatter, but Karen felt as though all the whispers were about her. Discreet glances were cast in her direction, and she felt exposed, as though every guest was waiting for confirmation of the suspicions forming in their minds. Her fingers trembled as they fidgeted with the napkin in her lap, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might be audible. She forced herself to take a steadying breath, then stood slowly, masking her turmoil with a practiced smile. Walking through the room, she exchanged greetings with acquaintances as if nothing had happened, each step deliberate, every word carefully measured. Inside, however, her thoughts churned. Where was James? What was he planning? And most pressing, how could she stop this escalating disaster? Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on her best friend, Margaret, who seemed to have noticed Karen's unusual demeanor. Are you all right, Karen? Margaret asked, her touch gentle on Karen's arm. Karen returned a smile, though the unease in her eyes was unmistakable. Of course, Margaret. I'm just a little tired. Putting all this together was more exhausting than I expected. Margaret's gaze narrowed, skepticism evident, though she chose not to press further. Well, everyone's saying this party is perfect. You and James really know how to create memories. Karen nearly choked on those words. Memories felt like a cruel joke at this moment. Across the room, James stood by a table near the bar, his dark gaze fixed on David, who was chatting casually with a group of Karen's co-workers. David appeared entirely at ease, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Each laugh that escaped David's mouth struck James like a blow. His grip tightened around his glass until it seemed it might shatter. When James finally moved, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. His steps were slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving David. Karen noticed from across the hall, and a wave of panic surged within her. She whispered under her breath, a silent plea. "Please don't do this here." Here's the paraphrased version of the text with all the specified guidelines followed. She muttered to herself, but the moment had already passed. James came to a halt a few steps away from David, who finally noticed his presence. David turned with a polite smile, but it quickly disappeared when he caught sight of James's expression. "James," David greeted, extending his hand in a friendly gesture. "Good to see you." James ignored the offered hand, leaning in slightly. "Good to see me, David?" he asked, his voice low and thick with restrained anger. "You shouldn't feel so at ease here. After all, this is my wedding anniversary celebration." David blinked in confusion before forcing a nervous smile. "Of course, it's a lovely event. Congratulations on 30 years. 30 years, James repeated, his tone like a blade. Years you clearly didn't respect. The murmur of the surrounding crowd quieted abruptly, their attention drawn by the escalating tension. David, trying to maintain his composure, asked, "What are you talking about, James? Do you really want me to explain it here?" James snapped, his voice rising slightly and drawing more curious stares. "Maybe I should, considering you didn't think twice about crossing boundaries with my wife." Karen rushed across the room as quickly as she could, though every step felt agonizingly slow. She arrived just as David stammered, "James, this is a misunderstanding. I would never—" "A misunderstanding?" James cut him off, his tone now practically shouting. "You think texts and secret meetings are just some kind of misunderstanding? Like none of this has consequences?" Karen reached out, placing a hand on James's arm in an attempt to calm him. "Please, not here. Not like this," she pleaded. But James shrugged off her hand, his focus still locked on David. "You destroyed my trust, David. And you—" He turned to Karen, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. "You broke everything we built together." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Shame and regret overwhelmed her, leaving her mute as James's accusations hung heavily in the air. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Then, suddenly, James took a step back, tossing the napkin he held onto the table. "This party is over for me," he declared. "I hope you two enjoy the rest of the night since you seem so close." Without waiting for a response, James turned on his heel and left the room, leaving Karen and David frozen under the weight of the crowd's judgmental stares. The silence that followed was nearly as deafening as James's outburst. Karen felt the sting of every gaze on her. But what hurt most was the void James had left behind. His departure carried the certainty that something precious had been irrevocably broken. The hall remained in an uneasy hush as the guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the scene. Karen, however, felt utterly isolated despite the room full of people. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door James had exited through, his absence lingering like an invisible wound. David hesitated, trying to speak, but Karen raised a hand to silence him. She knew anything he said would only make things worse. Her thoughts and emotions churned in a chaotic storm. Shame, anger, sorrow. She could feel the judgment in every glance, even from those who tried to avoid looking at her directly. To them, the idealized image of the couple they admired had shattered in an instant, like a glass slipping and shattering into pieces. Taking a deep breath, Karen made a sudden decision. She needed answers, regardless of the consequences. Without looking back, she left the hall, ignoring the concerned murmurs from friends and family. The cold night air hit her like a slap, but she pressed on. Her quick steps carried her to the parking lot, where she found James standing by the car, his hands braced against the roof as though it were the only thing holding him together. "James," she called, her voice cutting through the stillness of the night. He turned slowly, his face illuminated by the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Pain was etched into his features, mingling with a mix of anger and disillusionment she had never seen before. "Karen," he said quietly but firmly, "why are you here? Haven't you done enough damage?" His words hit her hard, but she refused to back down. She stepped closer, maintaining just enough distance to meet his gaze. "I'm not running from this, James. Not now. You're accusing me of terrible things, but you don't know the full story." James let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know? Karen, I saw the messages. I heard the whispers. And tonight, in that room, watching you with him, everything became clear." Karen closed her eyes briefly, searching for the right words. "I never wanted to hurt you. Never. What happened with David was a mistake, yes, but not in the way you're thinking. He was a broken man, and I was trying to help him. I got more involved than I should have, but that never meant I stopped loving you." James shook his head, as though trying to shake off her words. "Help him? That's what you call it, Karen? If that's all it was, you would have told me. But instead, you hid it for months. You lied. And now you expect me to believe it was innocent?" Tears welled in her eyes as she took another step forward. "I was afraid, James. Afraid of how you'd react. And yes, I made mistakes, but I never crossed the line you think I did. Never." He studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity, as if weighing her words. Finally, he sighed and looked away. "You know what hurts the most, Karen? It's not just what you did. It's what it says about us. 30 years, and you didn't trust me enough to be honest." His words hit her like an avalanche. "Do you think this was easy for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I lost my balance, James. I tried to be everything for everyone, and in the process, I lost sight of what really mattered." "And now?" he asked, meeting her gaze once again. "Here is the rewritten version of your text." Karen moved closer to him, stopping just a short distance away. "Whatever we decide to salvage is all that's left," she said, her voice steady. "I know I've broken our trust, but I also know that I don't want to lose you. I don't want everything we've built to be destroyed by one mistake. But I need to know if you still want to try." James exhaled deeply, staring at Karen as if he were trying to look beyond what was right in front of him. "I don't know, Karen. I need some time and space. Right now, all I see is the woman who hurt me on what should have been the happiest day of our lives." He got into the car, closing the door softly without slamming it. Karen stood there in the empty parking lot, watching the car's taillights fade into the distance. The party was still going on, but for her, the night had ended irreparably. Karen remained there for what felt like a long time, the cold night air brushing her face, the crushing silence mirroring her own confusion. Each passing second made the weight of her decisions feel heavier, as though the world itself was collapsing around her. James was gone, leaving behind a palpable emptiness. Now, alone, Karen realized that solitude was more devastating than any external judgment. Eventually, she made the choice to return inside, even though it meant facing the prying eyes and hushed murmurs of others. Walking through the room filled with low conversations felt like moving through a silent courtroom. Some people looked away, not wanting to make it obvious, while others didn't bother to hide their stares. Karen knew she was at the center of every whispered conversation. In a corner of the room, David stood, visibly uncomfortable. He tried to seem occupied, speaking to a small group, but his stiff posture and the nervous glances he cast toward Karen revealed his unease. When she noticed him, something stirred inside her, a mix of anger, not just at him, but also at herself, for letting things spiral out of control. She walked towards him, her steps firm, ignoring the curious looks from others. As she got closer, those few around him moved away, sensing this wasn't a conversation for them. "David," she began, her voice quiet but determined. He turned toward her, and his expression softened, as if relieved she was there. "Karen, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this," he said, his tone sincere. She raised her hand, cutting him off. "No, let's not do this here. This isn't about you, David. It never was. It's about me, about the choices I made and the consequences they've brought. I took on a role that wasn't mine, and now I'm paying the price." David's face scrunched in confusion. "I don't understand. You were helping me. You were the only one who cared when I needed it most." "And that's the problem," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I cared more than I should have. Not because you were wrong to need help, but because I neglected what mattered most to me. I used your pain as a way to avoid my own issues, and now I've lost something I might never get back." David seemed like he wanted to respond, but no words came. He realized that anything he said could make things worse. Karen didn't wait for him to speak. Without another glance, she turned and walked back to the main table, where the party continued to unfold. But to her, it felt like a distant scene. Hours later, when the party finally ended, Karen went home. The house was eerily quiet, almost suffocating in its stillness. She walked through the hallway, her gaze falling on the pictures on the walls, each one a reminder of happier times that now seemed distant. Her hand lingered over one frame, an image of her and James during a beach trip early in their marriage. They were laughing, their hair tousled by the wind, their eyes filled with an unshakable joy. She picked up the photo and sat down on the couch, staring at it as though she were reaching for something lost. That's when she noticed an envelope on the coffee table. Her name was written on it in James's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. Each word felt like a blow to her chest. "Karen," the letter began. "Today was supposed to celebrate everything we've built together. But instead, it showed how far we've grown apart. I know life isn't perfect, and mistakes happen. But what hurts the most isn't the mistake itself. It's that you couldn't trust me enough to be honest. I don't know what the future holds for us right now. All I know is that I need time. I need to figure out if there's still something worth fighting for between us. And you, Karen, need to decide who you really are and what you want from life. I hope we can find a way to work through this someday. But today, I'm not strong enough to try." Karen's tears fell hot and endless as she clutched the letter like it was her last connection to the man she loved. As painful as it was, she knew James was right. Her decisions hadn't just hurt him. They had shattered the trust that held their relationship together. And now, for the first time in years, Karen was entirely alone, left to confront the consequences of her actions. It was a hard, but inevitable lesson. Sometimes love alone can't heal what's been broken. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.